Introduction. Have you ever had a moment where something felt wrong before you could explain why? Maybe you walked into a room and immediately felt uncomfortable. Maybe someone sent you a simple message that said, "Can we talk later?" And suddenly your stomach tightened. Maybe you felt exhausted, anxious, irritated, or distracted all day, but when someone asked what was bothering you, you genuinely didn't know. Most people assume awareness comes first. They assume they notice something, think about it, and then react. But that's rarely how it works. In reality, your body is often responding to life long before your conscious mind catches up. And understanding this changes the way you see yourself. Because many of the struggles you experience are not signs that you're irrational, weak, broken, or overly emotional. They're signs that your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem is that most people have never been taught how that process works. So they end up fighting symptoms without understanding where those symptoms came from. They try to think their way out of experiences that started long before conscious thought became involved. And the more they fight it, the more confusing it becomes. You feel anxious. Then you judge yourself for being anxious. You feel exhausted. Then you criticize yourself for lacking motivation. You feel uncomfortable around someone. Then you convince yourself you're overreacting. Meanwhile, your nervous system is trying to communicate something important. Not because it's always right. Not because every feeling is accurate. But because it is constantly processing information that your conscious awareness hasn't fully recognized yet. Think about driving a car. When you're driving, your eyes are absorbing thousands of pieces of information every second. Road signs, other vehicles, traffic lights, pedestrians, road conditions, weather, distances, speeds. You are not consciously analyzing every detail. If you had to consciously process every single piece of information one by one, driving would be impossible. Instead, much of that processing happens automatically. Your brain filters, sorts, predicts, and prioritizes information without requiring your awareness. Only the most important information rises into conscious attention. Your nervous system works the same way. At every moment, it is scanning your environment. Not just physical environments, social environments too, emotional environments, relationship dynamics, changes in tone, subtle shifts in behavior, patterns that resemble previous experiences, signals that suggest safety, signals that suggest uncertainty, signals that suggest potential danger. And all of this is happening whether you're paying attention or not. This is why you can feel stressed before you know what you're stressed about. It's why your shoulders can tighten before you realize you're overwhelmed. It's why your heart can race before you've consciously identified what feels threatening. The reaction begins first. The explanation often arrives later. This realization can be uncomfortable at first. Most people like to believe they're fully in control. They want to think that every decision starts with logic, that every emotion begins with a conscious thought, that awareness is always leading the process. But much of human experience doesn't work that way. The body is constantly gathering information. The nervous system is constantly making predictions, and awareness is often receiving the report after the work has already started. This doesn't mean you're powerless. In fact, it means the opposite. Because once you understand what's happening, you stop treating every reaction as a personal failure. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" And you start asking, "What is my nervous system responding to?" That question changes everything. Instead of attacking yourself, you become curious. Instead of forcing yourself through every feeling, you start investigating it. Instead of assuming your reactions are random, you begin looking for patterns. And those patterns reveal more about your life than you might expect. They reveal what drains you, what energizes you, what environments support you, what relationships create tension, what habits quietly increase stress, what situations consistently make your body feel safe. Most people spend years trying to understand themselves through thought alone. But your thoughts are only part of the story. Your body has been collecting data the entire time. The question isn't whether your nervous system is reacting. It is. The question is whether you've learned how to listen to what those reactions are trying to tell you. Because once you begin paying attention, many experiences that once felt confusing start making sense. And what seemed like random anxiety, unexplained exhaustion, or irrational discomfort often turns out to be your nervous system recognizing something before your conscious mind had the words for it. Your body is paying attention even when you aren't. Most people assume that if they don't consciously notice something, then it probably isn't affecting them. But your life provides evidence against that idea every single day. Think about how many things you do automatically. You can walk through your house in the dark. You can recognize a friend's voice instantly. You can tell when someone is upset before they say a word. You can sense tension in a room before anyone mentions that something is wrong. None of these abilities require conscious effort. Your brain is processing information in the background constantly. The same thing is happening with your nervous system. At every moment, it is collecting information from your environment and comparing it to everything it has learned throughout your life. This process never stops. Even while you're reading this, even while you're watching television, even while you're trying to relax, your nervous system is paying attention. The interesting part is that your conscious awareness only gets access to a tiny fraction of what is being processed. Imagine standing in the middle of a busy city street. Your eyes are taking in hundreds of details. Cars moving, people walking, conversations happening nearby, buildings, colors, movement, sounds, weather, smells. You are surrounded by an overwhelming amount of information. Yet somehow, you don't feel overwhelmed by every detail at once. Why? Because your brain filters most of it out. If it didn't, functioning would be impossible. Your awareness is more like a spotlight than a floodlight. It focuses on a few things while everything else remains in the background. But background processing doesn't mean background influence. This is where many people misunderstand themselves. They think that because they aren't consciously thinking about something, it must not be affecting them. That isn't true. You may not be consciously thinking about a stressful relationship, but your body can still respond to it. You may not be consciously worried about work, but your nervous system can still be carrying that load. You may not consciously recognize that you're exhausted, but your body may already know. This explains why people often become frustrated with themselves. They wake up feeling off. They can't focus. They feel irritable. Their motivation disappears. Their patience becomes shorter. And because they can't identify a clear reason, they assume they're doing something wrong. They tell themselves they need more discipline, more willpower, more productivity, more motivation. But sometimes the real issue isn't a lack of effort. Sometimes the issue is that the body is responding to information the mind hasn't fully acknowledged yet. Think about the last time you had a major decision to make. Maybe it involved a job, a relationship, a move, a commitment. You probably spend a lot of time trying to think your way toward the right answer, making lists, analyzing possibilities, comparing outcomes. But during that process, your body was providing information too. Perhaps every time you imagined one option, your chest tightened. Perhaps another option brought a sense of relief. Perhaps one path felt heavy while another felt lighter. Those reactions weren't random. They were part of the information available to you. Not necessarily proof, not absolute truth, but information. The problem is that many people have been trained to ignore this layer of experience. From a young age, they're taught to trust logic while dismissing physical signals. They learn to override fatigue, ignore stress, suppress discomfort, push through warning signs. And over time, they lose contact with what their body is communicating. The body keeps speaking, but nobody is listening. This creates an interesting situation. The nervous system continues gathering information and responding to life. Yet conscious awareness becomes increasingly disconnected from those responses. Eventually, people find themselves asking questions like, why am I always tired? Why am I always anxious? Why do I feel overwhelmed all the time? Why do I keep reacting this way? The answer is often hiding in plain sight. Their body has been responding for weeks, months, or even years. The signals were there. The tension, the exhaustion, the restlessness, the inability to fully relax, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. But because the signals weren't consciously understood, they were ignored, until they became impossible to ignore. This is one reason burnout rarely feels sudden. People often describe burnout as if it appeared overnight. But when they look back honestly, they realize the signs were present long before the collapse. The body knew. The nervous system knew. Awareness arrived late. The same thing happens in relationships. Someone might say they were completely shocked when a relationship ended. But after reflection, they remember months of tension, subtle disconnection, repeated unresolved conflicts, a growing feeling that something wasn't working. Their body had been registering those signals all along. Awareness simply hadn't caught up yet. This isn't because you're unaware or unintelligent. It's because conscious awareness has limits. You cannot consciously track every piece of information entering your system. No human can. That's why your nervous system exists. Its job is to process far more information than your conscious mind can handle. Its job is to notice patterns, detect changes, identify risks, recognize safety, prepare responses, all before you fully understand what's happening. Once you begin seeing this, an important shift occurs. You stop viewing your reactions as random. You stop assuming every uncomfortable feeling is a personal flaw. You stop treating yourself like a machine that should perform perfectly regardless of circumstances. Instead, you become curious. You start asking better questions. What might my body be responding to? What patterns have I been missing? What signals have I ignored? What has my nervous system been trying to tell me? Those questions open a door that many people never realize exists. Because the goal isn't to control every reaction. The goal is to understand where those reactions are coming from. And that understanding begins with a simple realization. Your body has been paying attention long before your conscious mind noticed there was something worth paying attention to. Why your nervous system reacts so fast. Once you understand that your body is constantly paying attention, the next question becomes obvious. Why does it react so quickly? Why doesn't it wait until you've had time to think things through? Why does your heart race before you've identified the problem? Why do your muscles tighten before you've reached a conclusion? Why does anxiety sometimes appear before you've found a reason for it? The answer is surprisingly simple. Your nervous system was not designed primarily for understanding. It was designed primarily for survival. Those are not the same thing. Understanding takes time. Survival often doesn't. Imagine you are walking through a forest thousands of years ago. You hear movement in nearby bushes. If your survival depended on stopping to analyze every possible explanation, you would be at a disadvantage. You would need to ask yourself, was that the wind? An animal? A threat? Should I investigate? Should I run? Should I stay still? By the time you've completed the analysis, the situation may already have changed. Your nervous system solves this problem by prioritizing speed over certainty. Instead of waiting for perfect information, it responds to possibilities. It prepares the body first. Then it allows the mind to figure out what happened. This strategy has kept humans alive for a very long time. And even though your daily life may look completely different from the lives of your ancestors, your nervous system still operates using many of the same principles. The world changed. Human biology did not change nearly as quickly. This is why modern stress can create reactions that seem confusing. Your body doesn't distinguish between every type of threat in the way your conscious mind does. To your thinking mind, a difficult conversation and a charging animal are obviously different situations. To your nervous system, both may contain uncertainty, risk, and potential consequences. The details are different. The preparation process is often similar. Heart rate increases. Attention narrows. Muscles become ready for action. Breathing changes. Energy is redirected. The body prepares itself, not because it knows exactly what is happening, because it wants to be ready if something important is happening. This is one reason people become frustrated with themselves when they experience anxiety. They assume anxiety means they are weak, or irrational, or incapable of handling life. But often the nervous system is simply doing what it evolved to do. It is identifying uncertainty and preparing for action. The problem isn't always the reaction itself. The problem is that modern life presents your nervous system with situations it was never specifically designed for. Your ancestors rarely worried about unread emails, performance reviews, social media, deadlines, financial projections, public reputation, digital notifications arriving every few minutes. Yet many of these situations trigger the same underlying systems that once helped humans survive physical dangers. The nervous system detects importance. It detects uncertainty. It detects potential consequences. And it responds. This explains something that confuses many people. You can know intellectually that something isn't dangerous and still feel stressed by it. For example, you may know that giving a presentation at work won't physically harm you. You may know that speaking up during a meeting is relatively safe. You may know that sending an email carries little actual danger. Yet your body may still react strongly. Why? Because intellectual knowledge and nervous system responses are not always operating at the same speed. Your conscious mind may understand the situation. Your nervous system may still be preparing for uncertainty. This is why simply telling yourself to calm down often doesn't work. The body is not waiting for a motivational speech. It is responding to signals. And those signals are being processed much faster than conscious reasoning. Think about what happens when someone unexpectedly calls your name from behind. You don't consciously decide to turn your head. You don't create a detailed action plan. The response happens automatically. Your body moves before you fully thought about it. This isn't a flaw. It's an advantage. The same principle applies across countless situations throughout daily life. The nervous system is constantly making predictions. It is asking questions like, what is happening? What might happen next? Do I need to prepare? Should I pay closer attention? Am I safe? The remarkable thing is that these questions are usually answered long before they become conscious thoughts. Most people assume their thoughts create all of their reactions. In reality, reactions often influence thoughts. The body changes state. Then the mind begins explaining that state. The body becomes tense. Then the mind looks for reasons. The heart rate increases. Then the mind searches for explanations. The nervous system becomes alert. Then awareness starts building a story around what it notices. This doesn't mean your thoughts are unimportant. They matter tremendously, but they are often entering a process that has already begun. Recognizing this can create a surprising amount of self-compassion, because many people spend years criticizing themselves for reactions they don't fully understand. They assume every emotional response should be under conscious control. They assume every stress response represents a personal failure. But that expectation ignores how human beings actually work. Your nervous system is not waiting for permission to protect you. It is not requesting approval before scanning for risks. It is not asking whether now would be a convenient time to become alert. It is doing its job. Every moment, every day, without rest. The goal is not to eliminate these reactions. That would be impossible. The goal is to understand them. Because once you understand why the nervous system reacts so quickly, you stop treating those reactions as enemies. You begin seeing them as information. Sometimes imperfect information. Sometimes outdated information. Sometimes information that requires further examination. But information nonetheless. And when you stop fighting the reaction itself, you can finally begin exploring what the reaction might be trying to tell you. The hidden signals your body notices. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that the nervous system reacts to obvious threats. But most of the time, it doesn't. In everyday life, your nervous system is responding to signals that are so small and subtle that your conscious mind barely notices them. Yet those signals can completely change how you feel. Think about the difference between two people saying the exact same words. One person says, "I'm happy to see you," and you instantly feel welcomed. Another person says, "I'm happy to see you," but something feels off. The words are identical. The message is identical. Yet your experience is completely different. Why? Because communication is about much more than words. Your nervous system is paying attention to things your conscious mind may never fully analyze. Tone of voice, facial expressions, body posture, eye contact, timing, energy, consistency, the relationship between what someone says and how they say it. You may not consciously think about any of these details, but your nervous system does. Imagine meeting someone for the first time. Within seconds, you often develop a feeling about them. You may feel comfortable, uneasy, relaxed, guarded, interested, distrustful. Most people assume these feelings appear randomly, but they are often responses to hundreds of tiny signals being processed simultaneously. The way someone carries themselves, the speed of their speech, the tension in their face, whether their expressions match their words, how predictable or unpredictable they seem. None of this requires conscious analysis. Your nervous system is constantly gathering information and forming impressions. This is why you can sometimes walk into a room and immediately sense tension. Nobody has said anything. Nobody has explained anything. Yet something feels different. Perhaps two people recently had an argument. Perhaps there is unresolved conflict. Perhaps everyone is pretending things are normal. Your conscious mind may not know the details, but your nervous system notices subtle shifts. People become quieter. Body language changes. Conversations feel forced. Attention feels divided. Tiny details begin adding up. The body recognizes the pattern before the mind creates an explanation. This process happens in environments as well. Consider how differently you feel in certain places. Some places help you relax almost instantly. Others create tension without any obvious reason. You may walk into one coffee shop and feel calm. You may walk into another and feel restless. The difference may not be conscious. It could be lighting, noise levels, crowding, movement, predictability, the overall atmosphere. Your nervous system is evaluating all of it. This is why people often underestimate the impact of their environment. They focus only on what they consciously notice. Meanwhile, their body is responding to dozens of factors operating beneath awareness. The same thing happens online. Many people think stress only comes from major life events. But your nervous system doesn't only react to major events. It reacts to repeated signals, constant notifications, unexpected messages, conflicting information, social comparison, uncertainty, the feeling that something demands your attention. Individually, each signal may seem small. Together, they create an environment that the nervous system must continuously monitor. This is one reason modern life can feel exhausting. Not because every individual event is overwhelming, because the number of signals never stops. Your nervous system is constantly deciding what deserves attention, constantly scanning, constantly updating, constantly predicting. Now consider how this affects relationships. Many people stay confused about why they feel drained around certain individuals. On paper, everything seems fine. Nothing obviously wrong is happening. The person may even be kind. Yet every interaction leaves them exhausted. Often this has less to do with a specific event and more to do with accumulated signals. Perhaps the relationship feels unpredictable. Perhaps conversations require constant self-monitoring. Perhaps there is hidden criticism. Perhaps there is emotional inconsistency. The nervous system notices patterns long before the conscious mind organizes them into clear conclusions. This can be difficult to accept because humans prefer certainty. We want clear explanations, concrete reasons, definitive evidence. But much of nervous system communication begins as a feeling before it becomes a thought. Something feels heavy, something feels off, something feels safe, something feels draining. The feeling arrives first. The understanding comes later. Of course, this doesn't mean every feeling should be blindly trusted. The nervous system can misinterpret situations. Past experiences can influence present reactions. Old patterns can create false alarms. We'll explore that later. But even when the interpretation isn't perfect, the signal itself is worth paying attention to. Because the signal tells you something important. It tells you that your system has detected a pattern. Something has captured its attention. Something has triggered a response. And that information deserves curiosity rather than immediate dismissal. Many people spend years arguing with their own reactions, trying to convince themselves they shouldn't feel what they feel, trying to override discomfort, trying to suppress signals, trying to force themselves to ignore what their body keeps noticing. The result is often confusion, because ignoring signals doesn't eliminate them. It simply removes your opportunity to understand them. A more useful approach is curiosity. Instead of asking, "Why am I reacting like this?" ask, "What might my nervous system be noticing?" That question changes everything, because now you're no longer fighting your experience. You're investigating it. You're looking beneath the surface. You're searching for patterns rather than explanations. And often, those patterns reveal information your conscious mind hadn't fully recognized yet. The hidden signals were always there. Your nervous system simply noticed them before you did. Why you feel anxious before you know why. One of the most confusing experiences you can have is feeling anxious when you can't identify a reason for it. You wake up feeling unsettled. You sit down to work and can't focus. You feel restless, distracted, irritable. Something feels wrong. But when you try to explain it, nothing obvious comes to mind. This is often the point where people become frustrated with themselves. They start searching for a reason. And when they can't find one immediately, they assume the anxiety is irrational, or they assume they're overreacting, or they begin criticizing themselves for feeling the way they do. But what if the anxiety isn't appearing without a reason? What if the reason simply hasn't become conscious yet? This is where understanding the nervous system becomes incredibly valuable, because anxiety is often less like a random emotion and more like an early notification. It is your system telling you, "I've noticed something that deserves attention." The challenge is that the notification frequently arrives before the explanation. Think about your phone. Sometimes an app sends a notification before you know exactly what happened. You see the alert first, then you open it to learn the details. Your nervous system works in a similar way. The feeling often arrives before the story. The body reacts before the conscious mind understands why. This is one reason anxiety can feel so mysterious. People are looking for a complete explanation when the nervous system is still in the middle of gathering information. The body has already detected a pattern. Awareness hasn't fully translated it yet. Consider a common example. Imagine your manager asks if they can speak with you tomorrow morning. That's all they say. Nothing else. No context. No explanation. Just a simple request. Immediately, your stomach tightens. Your attention shifts. You feel uneasy. Why? At that moment, you don't actually know what the conversation is about. There is no concrete problem yet. But your nervous system has detected uncertainty. And uncertainty often creates activation. The mind starts searching for answers. Did I do something wrong? Am I in trouble? Did I miss something important? What if something bad happens? The body reacts first. The thoughts begin organizing themselves afterward. This is why anxiety often feels future-oriented. The nervous system is not only reacting to what is happening, it is also reacting to what might happen. It is constantly predicting, forecasting, preparing, trying to reduce uncertainty. This prediction process is useful. Without it, you couldn't plan ahead. You couldn't anticipate challenges. You couldn't prepare for important situations. The problem occurs when the prediction system becomes overloaded, when uncertainty becomes constant, when too many variables remain unresolved, when too many signals compete for attention. Modern life creates plenty of opportunities for this. Unread messages, financial concerns, relationship questions, work deadlines, health worries, decisions that haven't been made, conversations that haven't happened. None of these situations may be emergencies, but each one creates uncertainty. And uncertainty is something the nervous system takes seriously. This is why anxiety often feels larger than the situation itself. The body is not only responding to facts, it is responding to possibilities. Now consider another example. Have you ever felt anxious around someone who technically hasn't done anything wrong? You can't point to a specific event. You can't explain it clearly. You just feel uneasy. Many people immediately dismiss these reactions. They tell themselves they're imagining things. They tell themselves they're being unfair. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes the nervous system is recognizing patterns that conscious awareness hasn't organized yet. Perhaps the person's words and actions don't match. Perhaps they are unpredictable. Perhaps there are subtle signals that create uncertainty. Your nervous system notices inconsistencies long before your conscious mind develops a clear explanation. Again, this doesn't mean every feeling is accurate, but it does mean every feeling contains information, and information deserves attention. One of the most helpful shifts you can make is learning to stop asking, "How do I get rid of this anxiety?" and start asking, "What is this anxiety trying to point toward?" Notice the difference. The first question treats anxiety like an enemy. The second treats anxiety like a messenger. A messenger may not always be correct, but dismissing the message without investigation rarely helps. The goal isn't to obey every anxious feeling. The goal is to understand it. Because anxiety often becomes louder when it feels ignored. Your nervous system keeps sending signals because it believes something requires attention. The more disconnected you become from those signals, the more intense they often become. This is one reason people sometimes experience what appears to be sudden anxiety. In reality, the signals may have been present for weeks. The body was communicating. The messages were small, subtle, easy to dismiss. Then eventually the volume increased. Not because the nervous system wanted to punish you, because it wanted to be heard. Think about how many times you've pushed through stress while telling yourself you were fine. How many times you've ignored exhaustion. How many times you've convinced yourself that a situation wasn't affecting you, only to realize later that it had been affecting you the entire time. The nervous system often notices these things long before conscious awareness does. That doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you overly sensitive. It makes you human. Your nervous system is constantly monitoring your world, tracking changes, looking for patterns, watching for uncertainty, preparing for what might come next. And sometimes anxiety is simply the first visible sign that this process is already underway. The feeling appears before the understanding. The reaction arrives before the explanation. And learning to recognize that reality can completely change your relationship with anxiety. Because instead of treating it as proof that something is wrong with you, you begin seeing it as evidence that your nervous system is trying to tell you something worth paying attention to. The role of past experiences. At this point, you may be wondering something important. If the nervous system is constantly reacting to signals, how does it decide which signals matter? Why does one person feel completely comfortable in a situation while another person feels anxious? Why can two people experience the exact same event and walk away with completely different reactions? The answer often lies in something most people underestimate: your past experiences. The nervous system does not operate in a vacuum. It learns, it adapts, it collects information throughout your life, and it uses that information to predict what might happen next. In many ways, your nervous system works like a pattern recognition system. Every experience teaches it something. Some experiences teach safety, others teach caution, others teach avoidance, and many of these lessons happen without your conscious awareness. Think about learning to drive. At first, everything requires attention. You consciously think about mirrors, speed, turning, braking, parking. Every action feels deliberate. Eventually, much of that process becomes automatic. The nervous system learns patterns and begins handling them without requiring conscious effort. The same thing happens emotionally, except emotional learning is often less visible. Suppose a child grows up in a home where mistakes are met with criticism. Every time they make an error, they are judged, corrected harshly, embarrassed, made to feel inadequate. Over time, their nervous system begins learning something, not through logic, through experience. It learns that mistakes may lead to pain. Years later, that person may become extremely anxious whenever they receive feedback, even if the feedback is kind, even if the environment is supportive, even if nobody is criticizing them. The nervous system isn't reacting only to the present moment. It is reacting to patterns learned in the past. This is one reason people sometimes become confused by their own responses. They evaluate situations using present facts. Their nervous system evaluates situations using present facts plus accumulated experience. Those are not always the same thing. Imagine touching a hot stove. You only need to learn that lesson once. Afterward, your nervous system remembers. The next time you see a hot stove, you don't need to analyze the danger from scratch. The pattern has already been stored. This ability is incredibly useful. Without it, you would need to relearn the same lessons over and over again. But there is also a downside. Sometimes the nervous system learns patterns that remain active long after the original situation has passed. This doesn't mean the nervous system is broken. It means it is trying to protect you using information it believes is important. The challenge is that old information isn't always relevant to current circumstances. A person who experienced betrayal may become highly sensitive to signs of dishonesty. A person who experienced rejection may become highly sensitive to signs of exclusion. A person who experienced instability may become highly sensitive to uncertainty. The nervous system begins scanning for familiar patterns, not because it wants to create suffering, because it wants to prevent it. The problem is that prevention and accuracy are not always the same thing. If your nervous system has learned that a certain pattern was dangerous before, it may react whenever something similar appears, even if the current situation is completely different. Think about a smoke alarm. A smoke alarm is designed to detect possible danger, but sometimes it goes off while you're cooking dinner. The alarm is not broken. It is responding to signals that resemble what it was designed to detect. Your nervous system works in a similar way. Sometimes it identifies genuine threats. Sometimes it identifies false alarms. In both cases, it is following patterns it has learned. This understanding creates an important shift. Many people assume every reaction reflects present reality. That isn't always true. Sometimes a reaction reflects present circumstances. Sometimes it reflects unresolved experiences. Sometimes it reflects a mixture of both. This is why self-awareness becomes so important. Without awareness, every reaction feels equally true. Every fear feels like evidence. Every discomfort feels like proof. Every anxious thought feels like a fact. But when you understand how past experiences shape present reactions, you gain a new perspective. Instead of immediately believing every response, you begin investigating it. You start asking questions like, what is happening right now? What does this situation remind me of? Is my nervous system responding to the present? Or is it responding to something familiar from the past? These questions create space, and that space is powerful. Because reactions happen quickly, understanding takes time. The more awareness you develop, the better you become at separating the two. You begin recognizing when your body is responding to an old pattern, You begin noticing when past experiences are influencing present perceptions. You begin seeing connections that were previously invisible. This doesn't mean you ignore your reactions. Quite the opposite. You listen more carefully, but you listen with curiosity rather than certainty. Because curiosity creates learning. Certainty often creates blind spots. One of the most freeing realizations a person can have is understanding that not every reaction represents reality exactly as it is. Sometimes a reaction represents reality as it was. Sometimes your nervous system is operating from an old map, a map created by previous experiences, a map that once served an important purpose, a map that helped you survive, but a map that may no longer describe the territory you're standing in today. And once you recognize that possibility, you stop treating every reaction as an unquestionable truth. Instead, you begin treating it as valuable information. Information that deserves attention. Information that deserves understanding. Information that may reveal both what is happening now and what your nervous system learned long ago. When your body knows before your mind does. Most people have experienced a moment when they knew something before they could explain how they knew it. You meet someone and immediately feel comfortable around them. Or you meet someone and feel cautious for reasons you can't fully articulate. You walk into an opportunity that looks perfect on paper, yet something inside you hesitates. You find yourself drawn toward a decision before you've completed all the analysis. Later, when events unfold, you sometimes discover that your initial feeling contained information you hadn't consciously recognized. Experiences like these are often described as intuition. People use phrases like, "I had a gut feeling. Something didn't feel right. I just knew. My instincts were telling me something." These experiences are often misunderstood. Some people dismiss them completely. Others treat them like mystical powers. The reality is usually far more practical. In many cases, what we call intuition is the nervous system recognizing patterns faster than conscious awareness can explain them. Remember what we've already discussed. Your nervous system is constantly collecting information. It notices tone, behavior, consistency, environmental signals, past experiences, emotional patterns, subtle details that never fully enter conscious awareness. All of that information doesn't disappear. It continues influencing how you feel. Sometimes the result appears as a gut feeling, not because magic is happening, because your nervous system has processed information that your conscious mind hasn't organized into words yet. Think about an experienced firefighter entering a building. There are documented cases where firefighters suddenly felt that something was wrong and ordered everyone out. Only afterward did they discover that the floor was about to collapse or the fire was behaving unusually. They weren't predicting the future. Their brains had encountered thousands of situations over many years. Their nervous systems recognized patterns before conscious reasoning completed the analysis. The feeling arrived first. The explanation arrived later. This happens in everyday life as well. A manager may have a feeling that a project is heading toward trouble before they can explain why. A parent may sense that something is bothering their child before hearing a single word. A friend may notice that a relationship is changing before there is any obvious evidence. The nervous system is often detecting patterns long before conscious awareness catches up. This is one reason experience matters so much. The more experiences you have, the larger your library of patterns becomes. Your nervous system has more information to compare against. More examples, more references, more data. Over time, this can create surprisingly accurate instincts. But there is an important distinction that many people miss. Not every gut feeling is intuition. Sometimes it is fear. Sometimes it is anxiety. Sometimes it is an old pattern being activated. Sometimes it is a false alarm created by past experiences. This is why self-awareness matters. If you automatically trust every feeling, you can become trapped by old conditioning. If you automatically ignore every feeling, you lose access to valuable information. The goal is neither blind trust nor blind dismissal. The goal is investigation. Suppose you feel uncomfortable around someone. Instead of immediately deciding they are dangerous, you become curious. What am I noticing? What feels off? Is there something specific happening? Does this feeling belong to the present moment? Or does it remind me of a previous experience? These questions allow intuition and awareness to work together. The nervous system provides information. The conscious mind evaluates it. Both have a role to play. Many people make the mistake of placing all their trust in one while ignoring the other. Some trust only logic. They dismiss every emotional signal. They ignore discomfort. They suppress instincts. Then they find themselves repeatedly entering situations that looked good on paper but felt wrong internally. Others trust every feeling without examination. Every fear becomes a fact. Every discomfort becomes proof. Every reaction becomes reality. This creates a different set of problems. The healthiest approach sits somewhere in the middle. You respect the signal. Then you investigate it. You allow your nervous system to contribute information without giving it complete authority. Think about driving with a dashboard. The warning lights are important. Ignoring them would be foolish. But the warning light itself is not the diagnosis. It is a signal that something deserves attention. Your nervous system functions similarly. Feelings are signals. They point towards something. They invite investigation. They encourage awareness. They are not always conclusions. This perspective can completely change how you relate to yourself. Instead of fighting your instincts, you become curious about them. Instead of blindly following them, you examine them. Instead of treating them as irrational, you recognize them as part of a larger information system. Over time, this builds trust. Not blind trust. Informed trust. You begin recognizing which feelings consistently provide useful information. You begin noticing when your nervous system is identifying patterns accurately. You begin spotting situations where old conditioning is influencing current reactions. The relationship becomes clearer, more collaborative, less confusing. Eventually, you stop asking whether your body or your mind is right. You realize they are part of the same system. The nervous system notices. The conscious mind interprets. The body gathers information. Awareness creates understanding. And many of the experiences people call intuition are simply examples of that process happening faster than conscious thought can explain. Your body knew something, not because it possessed special powers, because it had already been paying attention long before your awareness realized there was something worth noticing. The signs your nervous system is reacting right now. At this point, everything we've talked about becomes more practical. Because understanding the nervous system is useful, but recognizing it in real time is where the change actually happens. Most people only notice their nervous system after it has already escalated, after anxiety is strong, after tension is obvious, after exhaustion becomes overwhelming, after emotions feel uncontrollable. But your nervous system rarely starts at that level. It usually begins much earlier, in quieter ways, more subtle ways, ways that are easy to miss if you're not paying attention. One of the earliest signs is tension in the body. Your shoulders slightly rising without you noticing. Your jaw tightening while you're focused on something else. Your stomach feeling unsettled for no clear reason. These are not random physical quirks. They are your nervous system shifting into a different state. Another early sign is breathing. When the nervous system becomes activated, your breathing often changes first. It becomes shorter, more shallow, less natural. You may not notice it until you suddenly take a deep breath and realize you've been holding tension for a while. Attention is another major signal. When your nervous system becomes activated, your focus changes. You may find yourself scanning for problems, overthinking simple situations, getting stuck in loops of thought, struggling to stay present. Your mind becomes less flexible and more reactive. This is not a failure of concentration. It is a shift in state. Your system is preparing for something it perceives as important. Then there is emotional tone. Not full emotions yet, but background feelings. A subtle irritability, a sense of unease, a low-level pressure, a feeling that something is not quite settled. Many people ignore these early signals because they are not dramatic enough to demand attention. But that is exactly why they matter. Your nervous system does not jump from calm to overwhelmed instantly. There are stages, gradual shifts, small internal changes that build over time. Another sign is behavior. You may notice yourself reacting faster than usual, getting defensive more easily, feeling less patient, avoiding certain conversations, delaying tasks that feel emotionally loaded. These behaviors are often downstream effects of internal state changes, not personality flaws, not character issues, just responses to how your system is currently organized. Even your thoughts change. When the nervous system is calm, thinking is flexible. You can consider multiple perspectives. You can pause. You can reflect. But when the nervous system is activated, thinking becomes narrower, more rigid, more repetitive. You may notice the same thought looping again and again, or difficulty seeing alternative explanations, or a tendency to assume worst-case scenarios. This is not because you are thinking incorrectly. It is because your system is prioritizing threat detection over exploration. Understanding this is important because it removes self-blame from the equation. You stop assuming your thoughts are purely logical expressions of who you are, and instead begin seeing them as reflections of a state your body is in. There is also a physical energy shift that many people overlook. Sometimes you feel restless, like you need to move but don't know why. Other times you feel drained, like your system has slowed down to conserve energy. Both are possible responses to the same underlying mechanism. Your nervous system is adjusting itself based on perceived demands. One of the most important things to understand is that none of these signals are inherently bad. They are not problems by themselves. They are indicators. They are feedback. They are early warnings that something in your system has changed. The difficulty is not the signals themselves. The difficulty is not recognizing them early enough. Because when you miss the early signs, you only become aware once the system has already escalated. Once tension has built, once emotions are strong, once thinking has become rigid, once your body feels overwhelmed. At that point, it feels like everything is happening all at once. But in reality, it has been building gradually. This is why awareness is such a powerful skill. Not because it prevents nervous system responses, but because it allows you to notice them sooner. Earlier awareness gives you more options, more space, more flexibility in how you respond. Instead of being carried by the reaction, you begin to observe it. Instead of identifying with it, you begin to recognize it. Instead of being inside it, you begin to see it happening. And that small shift changes everything. Because once you can see the signals as they begin, you are no longer reacting blindly. You are participating in the process consciously. And that is where real regulation begins. What happens when you ignore these signals? Most people don't ignore their nervous system on purpose. It happens gradually, almost automatically. You feel something in your body, a bit of tension, a bit of discomfort, a sense that something is off. And instead of stopping to understand it, you continue. You have work to do, messages to reply to, expectations to meet, people to take care of. So you push through. At first, nothing dramatic happens. You still function. You still perform. You still get things done. But internally, something important is happening. The signals don't disappear just because you don't respond to them. They accumulate. Think of it like ignoring small warning lights in a car. At first, it might just be a minor alert, something easy to dismiss. You keep driving, but the system doesn't reset just because you ignore it. It continues operating under strain. The same is true for your nervous system. When early signals are repeatedly ignored, the system doesn't stop communicating. It increases the intensity, not out of punishment, out of necessity, because subtle signals were not enough to get your attention. So the body begins to speak louder. What used to be mild tension becomes persistent tightness. What used to be occasional unease becomes ongoing anxiety. What used to be background fatigue becomes deep exhaustion. And at some point, the experience becomes hard to ignore. This is often where people finally start asking questions. Why do I feel like this all the time? Why can't I relax even when nothing is wrong? Why does everything feel overwhelming now? But from the perspective of the nervous system, nothing appeared suddenly. It has been building response upon response, layer upon layer, without resolution. One of the most common results of ignoring these signals is chronic stress. Not stress caused by a single event, but stress created by a system that never fully returns to baseline. Your body stays slightly activated even in safe environments. Your mind stays slightly alert even when resting. Your system never fully downshifts. Over time, this becomes your new normal. You no longer realize what calm actually feels like. Another outcome is emotional confusion. You start reacting in ways you don't fully understand. Small things trigger strong responses. Simple situations feel heavier than they should. You might find yourself snapping at people you care about, or withdrawing without knowing why, or feeling numb when you expect to feel engaged. These reactions are not random. They are signs of a system that has been carrying too much for too long. Eventually, this can lead to burnout. Not the dramatic version people imagine, but a quiet depletion, where motivation drops, where focus becomes difficult, where even basic tasks feel heavy, where rest doesn't feel restorative anymore. Burnout is not just exhaustion. It is a system that has been running in survival mode for too long without recovery. And recovery requires more than rest. It requires recognition, because you cannot regulate what you do not notice. You cannot respond to signals you keep overriding, and you cannot restore balance in a system that is constantly being ignored. This is where awareness becomes critical, not as a way to control everything perfectly, but as a way to interrupt the cycle early enough to make a difference. Because when you start noticing the signals earlier, something changes. You don't wait for breakdowns to respond. You don't wait for exhaustion to acknowledge limits. You don't wait for overwhelm to ask what is happening. You begin responding at the level of tension, at the level of discomfort, at the level of subtle shifts. And that is where prevention actually happens, not in avoiding life, but in listening earlier. Many people think strength is pushing through everything, but in nervous system terms, strength is often the ability to notice sooner, to respond earlier, to stop treating your body's signals as noise, and start treating them as information. Because your system is always communicating. The only question is whether you are in a state where you can hear it in time. Learning to listen before the alarm gets loud. At this point, the idea is no longer just about understanding your nervous system. It becomes about learning how to live with it more consciously. Because awareness without application doesn't change much. You can understand every concept we've discussed so far and still find yourself reacting the same way tomorrow. So the real question becomes, how do you begin noticing earlier? Not perfectly, not constantly, but early enough to make a difference. The first step is surprisingly simple. You start paying attention to your body before your thoughts fully take over. Most people do the opposite. They wait until they are overwhelmed, then try to think their way out of it. But by that point, the nervous system is already active. The system is already in motion. Instead, you begin earlier. You notice the small signals, before the anxiety becomes strong, before the frustration builds, before the exhaustion becomes heavy. This doesn't require complicated techniques. It requires interruption, a moment of pause in the middle of automatic living. For example, you might be working and suddenly notice your shoulders are tight. Most people ignore this. They continue working. But this is exactly the moment where awareness can begin. You don't need to fix anything immediately. You simply notice. My body is tense right now. That's it. No judgment. No analysis, just recognition. That small act interrupts the automatic cycle. Because most of the time, the nervous system escalates when signals are ignored, not when they are noticed. Another moment to pay attention is your breathing. Not in a forced way, not as a technique, just as observation. Is it shallow? Is it fast? Is it restricted? Or is it natural? Again, you are not trying to change it immediately. You are simply learning to see what is already happening. This is important because awareness creates space, and space reduces automatic escalation. When there is no awareness, reactions tend to unfold without interruption. Tension builds without notice. Emotion intensifies without reflection. Thoughts spiral without pause. But when awareness enters early, even slightly, the pattern begins to shift. Not because you are controlling the nervous system, but because you are no longer completely unconscious of it. Another key point is learning to notice emotional tone in the background. Not the obvious emotions, but the subtle ones. The low-level irritation, the quiet unease, the background fatigue, the sense that something is off without knowing what. These states are often early indicators. They are not problems to solve immediately. They are signals to acknowledge. Most people skip over this layer entirely. They only respond when things become intense. But by then, the system has already been building momentum for a while. Learning to listen earlier means respecting the quieter signals, even when they don't seem important, even when you feel like you should just keep going. Another important shift is separating urgency from importance. The nervous system often creates a sense of urgency when it is activated. Everything feels like it needs attention now, but not everything urgent is actually important, and not everything important feels urgent. Learning this difference helps you avoid reacting impulsively to every internal signal. Instead, you begin creating a small pause between feeling and action. In that pause, awareness can enter. And in that awareness, you regain choice. Not full control over every reaction, but the ability to respond instead of automatically react. Over time, this changes your relationship with yourself. You stop seeing your body as something that randomly disrupts your life, and start seeing it as a system that is constantly communicating with you. Sometimes loudly, often quietly, always consistently. The goal is not to eliminate nervous system reactions. That is neither realistic nor necessary. The goal is to understand them earlier in the process. Because the earlier you notice something, the more options you have. When you notice tension early, you can adjust. When you notice fatigue early, you can rest. When you notice emotional shifts early, you can reflect. But when you only notice at the peak, your options become limited. This is why awareness is not about perfection. It is about timing. And even a small improvement in timing can significantly change how your nervous system experiences daily life. Not by removing stress completely, but by preventing unnecessary escalation. By catching patterns before they become overwhelming. By recognizing signals before they turn into reactions you don't understand. And slowly, over time, you begin to trust something different. Not just your thoughts, not just your emotions, but the ongoing conversation between your body and your awareness. A conversation that has always been happening. You are simply learning how to finally listen to it earlier. Your body has been talking all along. If you look back at everything we've covered, one idea keeps repeating in different forms. Your nervous system is not silent. It is constantly active, constantly processing, constantly responding. The only difference between confusion and clarity is how early you become aware of what it is doing. Most people only recognize their body when it becomes loud, when anxiety is strong, when exhaustion is undeniable, when emotions feel overwhelming. But by the time it reaches that level, the system has already been speaking for a long time. In smaller signals, in subtle shifts, in quiet tension, in background feelings that were easy to dismiss. This is why so many people feel like their emotions come out of nowhere. From their perspective, it feels sudden. But from the nervous system's perspective, it was gradual. A buildup of ignored information. A collection of small signals that were never fully acknowledged. And this is where the misunderstanding usually happens. People assume they should only pay attention when something becomes serious. But the nervous system doesn't work in categories like serious and not serious. It works in patterns. It notices changes. It tracks consistency. It responds to repetition. A small signal, repeated often enough, becomes a strong signal. A subtle discomfort, ignored long enough, becomes a loud one. Nothing changes suddenly. It accumulates. This means your experience of life is not defined only by what happens to you. It is defined by how early you notice what is happening inside you. Two people can go through the same external situation and have completely different internal experiences. Not because the situation is objectively different, but because their nervous systems are processing it differently. One person notices early signals and adjusts gradually. The other ignores early signals and only reacts when the system becomes overwhelmed. The external event is the same. The internal timing is not. And timing is everything when it comes to the nervous system. Because the earlier you notice a shift, the more flexibility you have in how you respond. You can pause. You can adjust. You can step back. You can reflect. But when you only notice at the peak, your options shrink. Reaction replaces reflection. Survival mode replaces awareness. And everything feels more intense than it needed to be. This is why self-understanding is not about becoming perfectly calm or perfectly regulated. That is not realistic. It is about shortening the gap between signal and awareness, between reaction and recognition, between what your body is doing and what your mind understands about it. That gap is where confusion lives. That gap is where people feel lost inside themselves. But that gap is also where change becomes possible. Because once you see what is happening earlier, you are no longer fully inside the reaction. You are observing it while it unfolds. And that changes your relationship with it completely. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is randomly overwhelmed, and start seeing yourself as someone who is experiencing a system responding to information. Sometimes accurately, sometimes based on old patterns, sometimes influenced by stress, sometimes shaped by history, but always doing something meaningful, always trying to communicate, always attempting to keep you safe in the only way it knows how. And when you understand that, something softens. Not because everything becomes easy, but because everything becomes understandable. The reactions are no longer mysterious. They become readable, and what is readable can be worked with. This is the shift that changes everything. Not control, not elimination, not perfection, but understanding. The realization that your body has never been against you. It has been communicating with you the entire time. And the only question that remains is whether you are willing to finally listen to it before it has to get loud. Conclusion: everything we've talked about in this video comes down to a simple shift in perspective. Your nervous system is not waiting for you to notice life before it reacts to it. It is already engaged, already processing, already responding. And in many cases, it begins responding before your conscious mind has fully understood what is happening. This is why you can feel anxious without a clear reason. Why your body can tense before you understand why. Why certain situations feel off before you can explain it. Why intuition sometimes feels faster than thought. None of this means you are broken or overly sensitive. It means your body is doing what it was built to do. It is constantly scanning, detecting, and preparing based on information you are not fully aware of yet. The mistake most people make is assuming that awareness comes first and reaction comes second. But in reality, the process often moves in the opposite direction. Reaction first, understanding later. And when you don't know this, you end up fighting yourself. You try to force calm instead of understanding tension. You try to override anxiety instead of listening to it. You try to think your way out of signals that didn't start as thoughts. But once you see the pattern, something changes. You stop treating every internal reaction as a problem to eliminate, and you start treating it as information to understand. Not every signal is accurate. Not every feeling is a fact. But every signal is meaningful because it tells you something about how your system is responding to your environment, your history, and your current situation. And the more you learn to notice these signals earlier, the more space you create between stimulus and reaction. That space is where awareness lives. That space is where choice becomes possible. That space is where you stop being fully carried by automatic responses and start participating in them consciously. This is not about controlling your nervous system. It is about understanding it well enough that you are no longer surprised by it. Because your body has always been speaking. Through tension, through emotion, through energy shifts, through subtle reactions you used to ignore. The question was never whether it was speaking. The question has always been whether you were listening in time. And now, you are learning how. Final integration. If you take one thing from this entire video, let it be this. You are not reacting to life as slowly as you think you are. Your body is not waiting for your thoughts to give permission before it responds. And many of the experiences you call confusion are simply your nervous system processing information ahead of your awareness. This means you don't need to become someone who never reacts. That is not the goal. You are human. You will react. You will feel things before you understand them. You will have moments where your body responds faster than your mind can explain. The real shift is not eliminating that. The real shift is learning to recognize it earlier. So instead of being fully inside the reaction, you can see it forming. Instead of being surprised by your emotional state, you can notice how it begins. Instead of judging yourself after the fact, you can observe yourself in real time. This is where everything becomes more workable. Because awareness doesn't stop your nervous system from responding, but it changes your relationship to the response. You stop treating every internal shift as a problem, and you start seeing it as information. Sometimes useful, sometimes outdated, sometimes incomplete, but always worth noticing. And when you start living from that perspective, something subtle but important changes. You become less confused by yourself, less reactive toward yourself, less at war with your own internal signals. Not because your nervous system changes, but because your understanding of it does. And that understanding gives you something most people never develop. A small space between what you feel and what you do with it. In that space, you are no longer just reacting. You are aware that you are reacting. And that awareness is enough to change everything that follows.